next we have Mark Pascall, Director 3 months. Mark has spent the last 20 years immersed in complex internet-based technology solutions. He is passionate about helping organizations to understand emerging technology trends in the web, mobile, Internet of Things space, and their potential for business transformation. He has presented at conferences all over New Zealand on topics ranging from agile marketing, Internet of Things, to digital disruption and cryptocurrencies. Please welcome Mark to the stage.
Okay, can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Yes, great. Thank you. My name is Mark Pascall. I'm another non-marketer, I'm afraid. Got 2 in 1 session. I organised a conference last month called Ethereum NZ, but my day job is as Director of 3 months, and we're a software company, so we build complex software solutions for all sorts of people, and very much focusing on the new generation software, trust-based software, to help organizations better connect the physical and digital world. And for us, a big part of that is Internet of Things and blockchain and the increasing smart bot, chatbot, virtual private assistant technologies. So we're quite excited about that stuff. I was actually up here 2 years ago talking about Internet of Things. And today I'm going to be talking about the blockchain, Ethereum, smart contracts, and Bitcoin. Give you a bit of an introduction. It is a bit of a mind-bending, big, complex topic. It's certainly grabbing a lot of headlines, especially over the last 6 months, and in fact over the last 24 hours as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. In order to understand the concepts, it is useful to, and in fact vital, to really go back and understand a bit of the history as to how we got to this point. So going right back, since the beginning of humanity, if 2 people want to transact, they either need to trust each other, which is kind of fine if you're standing close to somebody and it's small amounts of value. But for other situations, you need a trusted intermediary, a third party. Many centuries ago, this would have been a trusted elder in our tribe. These days, it's more likely to be a bank, a bookmaker, a lawyer, the government. That's kind of how it works. Computers, databases turned up a few decades ago and allowed these intermediaries to scale, to get very, very big. The banks, the financial institutions, they went global. But also a new generation of intermediary started to turn up a few years ago that started to disrupt the old intermediaries. So we're talking about Google, Amazon, TradeMe, eBay, Airbnb, Uber, those guys, new intermediaries that disrupted the old intermediaries, but still the same basic concept. And that's the way the world works, right? Well, there's actually a few problems with this current model, the world that we're in. Excuse me. Number 1, these companies have become global mega organizations. They are obliterating the competition. Sometimes they're so powerful that they can influence government policy, and sometimes governments even have to bail them out when they mess up. The problem of wealth disparity globally is getting bigger and bigger. Second problem, these intermediaries are typically run by small groups of humans behind closed doors. These people can become corrupt, and we saw a lot of that in the global financial crisis, and we know for many governments around the world that corruption is simply a part of life. Third problem, whenever you have centralized databases, these databases are targets for hackers. People will try and get into those things. Whenever those databases have got information that people want to steal, money, personal information, and we saw that recently with the massive LinkedIn heist. The hacks that we hear about are a small fraction of the hacks that are actually going on. Number 4. Privacy. Every time we transact via an intermediary, a record of that transaction is being kept in a database somewhere. A slice of our privacy is being taken away from us. And finally, and probably the biggest sort of reason, the internet has changed the world. It's turned us into a global village, a global marketplace. When our customers, our trading partners are in different countries, what currency do we use? Where do we pay our tax? What legal system do we use when things go wrong? Governments, organizations are really struggling with this whole concept. They're trying to make sense of it. But aside from the challenges of trading across geographic boundaries, across country boundaries, we're also facing the new disruptors, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Airbnbs, who are creating their own walled gardens. Each walled garden has its own way of identifying you, your own login, your own reputation, its own bylaws. So for users, for marketers, for governments, for everybody, it's a very confusing and messy picture. So about 8 years ago, something I believe really quite profound happened. A mysterious person called Satoshi Nakamoto, or under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto, we don't know it's a him or her or they. It could be a guy called Craig from Australia, but we think probably not now. This mysterious person, I'll go with that story, pushed some open source code into the community and a white paper. And what he did was to create a software system that allowed people allowed untrusted individuals to transfer value without an intermediary, without that trusted middleman. He called it Bitcoin, and the world had really never seen anything quite like this. At the heart of his concept was this idea of a distributed, of a ledger that recorded every single transaction. And that's kind of how a bank does it. They have a big ledger, a database that records every ledger. Satoshi called his ledger the blockchain. But the big difference from his ledger, his database, was that it was decentralized, it was distributed. The closest thing that we'd really seen to Bitcoin, prior to Bitcoin turning up, was a thing called BitTorrent. So BitTorrent, you've probably heard of, is a system for sharing files. Each node on the BitTorrent network is able to communicate on a peer-to-peer basis. So on the left, we have the traditional client-server model, which is how the world runs. Typically, 99% of the computing runs. On the right, we have the peer-to-peer system, which BitTorrent started to make realistic. So the music and the film industry would love to shut down BitTorrent. They can't, because there's no central servers to shut down, there's nobody to sue. They can't do anything about it. As long as there are nodes on the network, then it exists. And anybody can become a node, you can become a node on that network and start participating. So what Satoshi did was to apply the peer-to-peer concept to a database, to a ledger. So every node on the network, on the Bitcoin network, and you can become a node, you can download the software on your PC, every node has a copy of that database. So think of it as like many of you will have used Google Docs, the Google spreadsheet. Think of it as like a big shared spreadsheet containing every single transaction that ever happened since the beginning 8 years ago when Satoshi first bought a pizza or something. So every single transaction is recorded in that list of transactions. So if you've got a complete copy, you know what the current state of the system is, and you can work out who owes who what and who owns what. And so every transaction that occurs goes on into that database, gets added in. And the way that Bitcoin works is that essentially every 10 minutes, it has like a heartbeat of 10 minutes, every 10 minutes, all the transactions around the world are packaged up, validated, packaged up, cryptographically locked, and added, cryptographically sealed to as a new block on the chain. So this chain of blocks is continually growing over time. This decentralized system and the cryptographic locking essentially means, and this is the really important bit, that it is immutable. It cannot be changed. It cannot be hacked. It cannot be stopped. It's unstoppable. So if I give you a Bitcoin, and I will do that in a second. I'll try and do a live demo. But so if I decide to give you a Bitcoin, and with my smart wallet, I can hold up my QR code and give you. I probably wouldn't give you a whole Bitcoin. I might give you a bit of a Bitcoin. If I did that, I'm not giving you anything. I'm not transferring any sort of digital token to you. All we're doing is we're both agreeing to update this ledger, this database that we both trust, which is replicated within minutes around the world. So I'm going to do a demo. 2 years ago, I stood up here and did a demo, which went disastrously wrong, for anybody who was here. I'm going to let me see this. So this is a form that is going to request some money, and we probably can't see that very clearly. This is a QR code that's essentially requesting 20 cents worth of Bitcoin into the Mark Beer Fund. So I've got a wallet, and if any of you want to play with this stuff, if you're on iOS, download Bread Wallet. That's probably one of the simplest wallets out there. Or on Android, there's a whole multitude of wallets there. And if you want some Bitcoin, come and grab me at the break, and I'll give you some Bitcoins or some bits of Bitcoins. But this is a simple form that is requesting money. So I will just, what I'm going to do, I want to send money to this thing. So I've got my wallets on my phone, and I'm just going to go press a button. This big button says scan QR code. And this is where it will probably go wrong. The screen isn't very clear. No, I'll do it from the screen here. Point to this QR code. Okay, I've done that. Oops, I've done that. It's asking me for my fingerprint. So it's linking my signature to my fingerprint, so it's uniquely identifying me. And my wallet is saying sent, and it pops up there. It's being paid. So that transaction is now being transmitted across the network to thousands, tens of thousands of computers around the world, and being cryptographically locked into the system. No bank sitting in the middle. Okay, wow, my demo worked, fantastic. Let's go. Okay, so where are we at with Bitcoin? It's been essentially an 8-year experiment. It's been controversial. There's been huge fraud around the exchanges, and what the exchanges are, so for good and bad reasons, the banks haven't wanted to go near this stuff. So in order to get money into the Bitcoin network, i.e. money that you earn, pounds, yen, dollars, you need to go through an exchange. And these exchanges have been set up by these are centralized, unregulated organizations that allow you to transfer your dollars into Bitcoin. These have been set up by all sorts of dodgy people, and somewhat understandably, some of these have gone belly up, so there's been huge fraud. Probably the biggest one was Mt. Gox in the early days of Bitcoin, which took out most of the people. It was the biggest exchange at the time, and just went belly up. So lots of controversy around that. The open source community behind Bitcoin have been infighting recently around which direction it should go. Again, it's not controlled by a central authority, it's controlled by the network, by a sort of consensus-based system. So all the miners, the people who are participating and validating all the transactions, they kind of have a vote, essentially, on what and how decisions are made. So that produces its own challenges. Just like any anonymous currency, and Bitcoin is actually pseudo-anonymous. It's actually fully transparent. So as I said, the blockchain is completely transparent. You can have a look at it and you can see every single transaction that was ever kind as a list. But what you can't see in that list of transactions is people's names. What you see is essentially what's called their public key. It's kind of like their bank account number. You see their bank account number. So unless you can map that bank account number to a name, then you don't know who has done what. So it's kind of pseudo-anonymous. What most of the wallets actually do now is to issue a new bank account number every time you do a transaction. So that sort of makes it even harder for anybody to sort of make that link between you and your bank account number for your transaction. So it is kind of pretty anonymous, and just like cash, it is therefore used for good and bad things. If you want to buy a gun or drugs, Bitcoin is probably a good answer. But you can't buy your groceries with it, you may have noticed. There are an increasing number of vendors supporting it, but yet I can't go down to New World and buy my groceries with it yet. Its demise has been predicted many times by the mainstream press, but it still seems to be going strong. So this is a graph of the value of Bitcoin against the US dollar, so for the last year. So it was hovering around $250 US dollars per Bitcoin. So bear in mind that Bitcoin can be broken down into millionths of a Bitcoin. So essentially, it's been a pretty good investment. And if you notice that big peak over the last sort of month or so, People think that increase is due to China, some regulations changing in China, and a lot of Chinese getting into the market. But the value of Bitcoin is a pure frictionless supply and demand model. So, which means, especially as it's a still relatively small market, it's influenced by press. If a big news article goes up, positive thing, then the price will go up a bit, and so it's a bit like that. So it's still pretty volatile, but not a bad reinvestment if you'd bought some a year ago. So, but fundamentally, what last 8 years have proved is that the experiment works. That we have created this unhackable, unstoppable system, and two interesting things happened during the early days. One thing was that people began to realize that you could not only store transaction information, a record of me transferring this bit of value to you, but you could also start to store other information. A birth, a death certificate. In fact, any information that has value and importance to humankind, you might want to store on the blockchain. Why would you want to do this? Because you want an immutable, unhackable record of that thing that happened. If you're in a third world country and you want to, and with a corrupt government, if you can store the land registry on a blockchain, that makes a lot of sense, and that is happening around the world. But other things, an insurance claim, a record of your educational achievement, title and deeds of house ownership, marriage certificate, a record of medical procedure, a vote. These are all things, these are projects that are happening around the world. They're going on the blockchain now as we speak. So the Internet of Everything needs a ledger of everything. The second really important thing that happened in the early days is that people realized that you could not only store transaction information and records of things, you could store sets of rules on the blockchain. And this is where we come to the smart contract. So I'll give you an example. So a simple transaction might be, yes, I'm going to give you a Bitcoin. I might also want to say, build in some rules that say, I can only give you a Bitcoin if Joe and Bob agree. So a multi-signature transaction. I might add another rule that says, I can only give you a Bitcoin if Joe and Bob agree, and it's between the hours of 8 and 9 in the evening. So we can start to build in business logic around this. And if all the interested parties agree on those rules up front, and we agree to put on the blockchain, then it is cemented on. It cannot be changed. That contract, that thing, will auto-execute. Nobody can stop it. No government, no bank. There's no intermediary to stop it. It will happen. And that's the really quite important thing about a smart contract. It's an unstoppable contract execution of some pre-agreed business rules. The problem was that Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain, was never designed to do that. It was designed with quite a narrow scope. It was designed as a contract, as a currency. It didn't, by design, have a programming language that would allow software developers like us to build in the complex logic behind, say, a will or a mortgage or a bet. So, 2 years ago, a 19-year-old guy called Vitalik Buterin decided it would be really cool to do a ground-up redevelopment, start again, to create a new blockchain. But he didn't have a vision of creating another currency. His vision was to create a platform that would allow smart contracts to be developed, so complex business transactions to be created. He called this thing Ethereum. He raised 19 million, crowdfunded 19 million, got a bunch of people together to build this thing, and it went live towards the end of last year. It remained pretty quiet for a while, and a lot of people like myself in the cryptocurrency world were watching it with bated breath, but with all these things, they only kind of come alive if enough people download the software, if there's enough nodes on the network. And what happened in January is that happened. Suddenly, everybody started downloading it. So this is the graph of the value of Ether. So Ether is kind of like Bitcoin. It's Ethereum's sort of currency. You use Ether to pay to run your contracts, so you gas up your contracts with Ether. And so Ether became a tradable, attractive commodity against other fiat currencies like the US dollar. So this shows the rise. So in January, February, suddenly it peaked at around $15 per Ether, then crashed down a bit and then went up again. And for those of you with good eyesight, you'll see a massive drop right at the end. That was this weekend, and I'll tell you why that happened in a minute. But and also Ethereum came out of beta. It went in March this year. It came out of sort of beta into what they call the frontier release and went into the homestead release. And I would argue for the first time in human history, just around that sort of February, March period, first time in human history, we had a way to create complex transactions between untrusted individuals. We'd never had that before. Let's take the example of a bet. As an example, it's quite interesting. I had a conversation with Eric Rowe from ANZ prior to this, because he'd seen this presentation, and I was asking him how I could adapt this for a marketing audience. And he looked me in the eye and said, "Don't show them any code." So I'm not going to show you any code, but I'm going to explain how a bet might work. So a bet, if I wanted to have a bet with you that the All Blacks are going to win the next Rugby World Cup, for instance, we might agree, so that the traditional way would be we'd use a bookmaker or we'd use a trusted lawyer. If I want to bet quite a large amount, $10,000 say, we'd need a trusted third party to sort of hold our money in escrow and pay the right person. With a smart contract, we could agree on what the rules are. Within a smart contract, we would write them down, we would encode them, and it would be transparent to both parties what those rules are. So they might be, okay, system at the appropriate date, go and check 5 websites that tell you what rugby scores are, make sure they all say the same thing, and if All Blacks win, pay you, if All Blacks lose, pay you. Simple set of rules, we would agree, and we would put that on the blockchain. We would sort of gas it up, we would put it on the Ethereum blockchain, and then wait. And then that, at the right time, as per the rules that we'd agreed, that contract would execute and pay the right person. But the key thing, as I said before, nobody could stop it. No legal system, no jurisdiction, no bank, no government could stop that transaction happening. The blockchain will run it for us. So the other interesting thing about smart contracts is that not only can they interact with humans, i.e. pay me some money as a result of a bet, but they can also start to interact with other smart contracts. And this is where the concept of the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization, starts to arrive. And essentially a DAO is a collection of smart contracts, visible, transparent, sets of the rules of how an organization might run, and these smart contracts are all interacting with each other to create an organization that runs entirely on the blockchain. This might seem like science fiction. This happened 6 weeks ago, the first DAO, called the DAO. They went live. They went into a creation phase in Europe. Well, it's not in Europe, it was just on the internet. Instead of raising money from investors, instead of raising money from crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter, what they did was to create their own currency, their own token called the DAO. This is the symbol for their currency, and they asked people to buy that currency. And unbelievably, people did. I was one of them, unfortunately. And to a tune of 150 million. So they raised 150 million in about 3 weeks, the biggest crowdfunding campaign in history. And the interesting thing about that little story, which happened on Saturday morning, three days ago, was that somebody realized Saturday morning that the funds in that DAO, the 150 million, were being stolen, were being siphoned off. And in broad daylight, it was visible. Somebody on Reddit said, "Hey, where's that money going? It's going there." Everybody was watching it, and nobody could do anything about it. It's been a fascinating story over the weekend, somewhat painful for those of us who put some money into it, but that money is being siphoned out, and we can see exactly where it's going, but we don't know who that person is doing the siphoning, and there's nothing. Well, there's lots of things that can be done, but there's a big philosophical debate as to what should be done. So it hasn't been stolen technically yet. It's kind of on the outer, almost been stolen, and yeah, so watch this space. It is a fascinating story of ideology versus theft versus this new generation. But whatever happens there, I think what the DAO did prove was that we can create these new types of organizations that run entirely on the blockchain. So, just really to finish off, I want to sort of run some thoughts around other things that could be of interest to marketers. I think the other dimension is the interaction with Internet of Things. So already there are projects to create Internet of Things-based hardware that talk to the Ethereum blockchain. And if you think about that, that's quite a powerful concept, because if you think of a lock, and there's a company called Slockit, so they make smart locks, locks that talk to the Ethereum network. So you could program a lock in this immutable contract that everybody agrees to adhere, or has to adhere to once it's been cemented on the blockchain, that does certain things. So this gives rise to potentially disruption of folk like Airbnb. So there could be a new Airbnb without the intermediary, without Airbnb creaming off profits from the interaction. Airbnb could be a series of smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain that allowed you to share your property with others. And it's not only your property, it could be sharing anything. So I think we're going to see an accelerated move to this is going to be one of the enabling technologies that's going to sort of push forward the sharing economy. So that's something I think is really interesting. The other, I think, dimension to the blockchain story is gaining control of your own data. I'm going to call it data because I'm British. Users being able to regain control of their data. I should be able to own and have control over my own medical records. I should be the one that decides whether I want to give my doctor access, or my insurance company access, or a brand access to some of that data, or some of it, all of it, none of it, anonymized, whatever. So, and I think we've struggled to know how to do that. We now have a technology that can enable that, and I think that will be a big change going forwards. So I should be able to decide how much of my data is exposed, and I think that will be quite an exciting move forwards. Loyalty programs, I think probably, especially for marketers, many people have been wrestling with the cost and struggling with how to broaden loyalty schemes across different brands via credit card companies, publishers, brands, retailers, airlines, hotels. I think, and often the back office costs of those those systems are quite prohibitively high. So I think with the blockchain, it will enable that to be far more cost effective and make many more opportunities for cross-brand loyalty systems to be built. I think that's going to be an area of quite exciting movement. Finally, decentralized virtual marketplaces, and I think this is where we're going to see some quite interesting intersections between the new generation of chatbot virtual private assistants as the new interfaces that start to interact with smart contracts that are kind of negotiating on our behalf. So we're going to have chatbots talking to vendor bots, talking to smart contracts to do stuff for us in the background. So I think that's going to be an exciting space. So just really to finish off, I've absolutely no doubt that the blockchain is going to disrupt a lot of things. It's going to make a lot of changes. The speed of that change, is difficult to predict, as with all these things. The hope is that it does create a world where power, wealth, control is more evenly distributed. It can do that. But then again, if you throw in a bit of AI, throw a bit of robotics, a bit of Internet of Things, we could end up with a slightly different scenario. So it's kind of up to us. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Ready for some questions, if we can?
Yep. Give it a go.
There's Guy.
Oh, God, we got loads.
There's quite a few, yes.
Oh, no.
We've got time, though.
Have we?
Yeah,
Oh,
you've done good time.
God, hundreds.
Oh, there's lots.
Yeah, hi, Mac. I'm sorry for your loss there, and I'll stand up.
Oh, yeah.
I just didn't quite understand is the trading between these various alternative currencies by people that own that currency, or can you go in and out of the traditional exchanges of, say, like the US dollar? So, in that Bitcoin or the Ethereum or the other currencies you talked about that, tradable items,
Yep.
and you use that Rugby World Cup bet future example, how does that actually work as far as in and out of the trade, if you like, or the exchange?
Yes, so the Rugby World Cup example assumes that we've both got Ether, or Bitcoin, or we've got Ether, and if it's running on the Ethereum blockchain, so the winner would win a whole bunch of Ether, and then they could convert that into anything. So there's Shapeshift is a great little exchange. It doesn't no login required. You can convert very easily from Ether to Bitcoin to, there's a bunch of other currencies, digital currencies, they're called out currencies, there's thousands of them. You can trade between those very simply. To get it out into New Zealand dollars, so you can buy your groceries, it is harder currently in New Zealand, and somewhat frustratingly, I mean, I found it relatively easy because I've got an English bank account still, so I can do it, and most of the rest of the world can do it. So I'm trying to change that, talking to Kiwi Bank, and the government's trying to change some regulations, but it is relatively hard. But yeah, but you can, these exchanges are set up to transfer your cryptocurrency into dollars that end up in your bank account. And you can also get, I mean, I've just applied for a Visa card that draws on my Bitcoin account, so you can even get those now. So.
Hi. I was just wondering about the contract side of things. So contracts are complicated things anyway, and when you add code to them and dependencies on like loopholes or things falling through the cracks and certain conditions not considered, what happens then?
Yeah, and quite topical, because that's essentially what happened with the DAO on Saturday morning, is that there was a bug in their code, not in the Ethereum code, not in the sort of currency framework, but in the people who wrote the smart contracts for that organization. There was a bug, a security vulnerability. And that can happen in a contract. And nobody quite knows how this is going to play out within the framework, the legal framework. Again, we have some very difficult questions around which legal jurisdiction does this sort of fall under. But yeah, if there's a bug in your smart contract, or if you just sort of don't quite understand it when you put it up, there's nothing you can do. It will run as you've programmed. And so I think we're going to need companies to help people write smart contracts. And I suspect we're going to have templates that have been audited by big name companies that we trust, that sort of kind of we can give some trust that somebody's looked through that code and it runs, and we've just got some easy boxes to fill out to make it a lot easier for the average user who really doesn't want to understand how to program a smart contract.
Hi Mac, it's Andrew from New Zealand Post. I lost a bit of money in the DAO thing on Saturday as well.
It's not lost yet. It's almost lost, but not quite.
Reduced in value considerably. How much do you think that DAO incident, the hack, has affected the confidence in Ethereum?
I think it definitely did, because the price dropped by about 50%, from $20 to $10 overnight. It's now bouncing back. I'm pretty certain. I mean, we saw this with Mt. Gox and the Bitcoin world. There was a big dent in the confidence. That took years to recover. I think this will be a lot quicker. I mean, this isn't. I think most people, if you look past the headlines, that's one of the problems, is that the press instantly picks up on, cryptocurrency hacked, and there's big headlines everywhere, and we've seen that in New Zealand as well. So that dents confidence, but it fairly quickly bounces back. I mean, the fact, I don't know what it is this morning, but it's up at sort of $12, I think, and I'm pretty confident it'll rise back up. There's a bit of a philosophical debate as to what they do to get the money back, if they can. And yeah, I'm just sort of following that quite closely, but I'm pretty confident it's not terminal. It's just a little hiccup. It was a bug in the code in one of the applications. It wasn't the Ethereum network's problem at all. So.
Cool, thanks.
One more question. There was you've been putting your hand up quite a lot. The guy in the maroon. I think it's maroon. It's quite hard to see from here. I'm just making it up as I go along.
Hi. So it's a revolutionary idea in the sense that two people can interact without an intermediary. But you said that in the future, for a smart contract to be really smart without holes, there might be a need for big companies to look at those contracts. Doesn't that defeat the purpose of that type of interaction? And secondly, with the creation of these different currencies and the blockchains, if nothing can be done or these contracts can't be broken or nobody can stop those contracts, isn't there a big black market that can interact with each other with illegal interactions?
Okay, I'll start with the second one first. Yes, absolutely. Just like cash, people can do bad things with cryptocurrencies and trade stuff and avoid, know your own customer, all this sort of stuff. And the regulators are going to just have to start to understand this stuff. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that. Just like there isn't an easy answer to stop people using cash to buy cannabis. It's there, and I think. Yeah, there's no answer to that one. The first one, which was, so I think it is a different thing. What I said before is around, I think there's a role for trusted organizations, it could be a Deloitte, it could be a bank, to help people create these smart contracts. But it's a fundamental difference though. Once that's been created, they're kind of out of the picture. This thing will automatically execute and nobody can stop it, nobody can control it after that point. So that's I think, quite big difference, an important difference. And of course you don't have to use a third party at all. You could just do it yourself, or you could just pull some pre-built template smart contracts from I guess a trusted source, but yeah, you could just use them and sort them out yourself. So.
Thank you very much, Mark Pascall, Director, 3 months.
Thank you.